So, Hannibal the Hater has uploaded a couple of videos in the last couple of days. The first one, about which I'm speaking, he either privated it or took it down because it had in it information that was just dead to rights wrong, just absolutely incorrect shit, complete nonsense. So he's redone that video, and he starts off with his very first point being complete, abject nonsense. So here's what he has to say.
So, in the interest of making sure that that bad information didn't get out again, I privated the video. However, I want to address the situation that I was addressing in that video and discuss it now. The general thrust of this is going to be involving the YouTube atheist community and their defense of Phil Mason for what he has done, doing, and continues to do in terms of claiming that somehow they're defending free speech and science like this. And this is something that keeps coming up over and over again. We are defending his free speech. His free speech matters more than anything. But here's the problem with all this, and let's get to the meat and potatoes of it right now. Firstly, the United States First Amendment applies to U.S. citizens. I do not believe Phil Mason is a U.S. citizen.
Now, for a person like Hannibal, one of the big problems in the world is that there's just too much free speech happening. People are all over just opening their fucking mouths and talking and talking and talking and talking and talking. And he doesn't like everything they have to say. Therefore, those people should be silenced. People like Hannibal are wannabe totalitarians. If they had any power, you can rest assured they would find ways to make sure, by whatever means is efficient, that people do not get to disagree with them. But they don't have that kind of power, so they're trying to find a way, as he'd argued in the video that he took down, or privated, to do things to Thunderfoot, to make sure that Thunderfoot gets the message that he needs to shut his fucking mouth. He needs to stop going around and having his own ideas, and arguing for those ideas in public, trying to persuade people that he's correct. That's the kind of thing that we can't be happening. Hannibal, on the other hand, should be entirely free to say anything he wants, without any restriction, whatever. So, the first point in this video is this. Now, there are two notions of freedom of speech, one of which is just the ability to actually open your mouth, quite apart from the law. Just the idea, the notion that if people have thoughts, they should be able to say them in public and have other people hear them and respond to them, either in the affirmative or in the negative or something in between. And then there's the legal concept of freedom of speech, which is what Hannibal's talking about here. And in particular, he said that the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States applies to citizens, which is true. It really does apply to citizens. That's true. But what he didn't say that he should have said is that he's saying that it doesn't apply to non-citizens, which is just false. This is actually fairly settled law here. Anyway, so then he goes on to say that he doesn't actually know. Well, he says, I don't believe that Thunderfoot is an American citizen. Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. I don't know. But given that I don't know, I'm not going to go ahead and just assume that he's not and then say something stupid. Well, that's stupid twice over. Once you're just coming up with whatever you think feels good about whether or not he is or isn't a citizen, and then you're misstating what the law is. So I'm going to read from a concurring opinion in Bridges against Wixon, 326 U.S. 135 from 1945. I don't want to read the opinion of the court because it's very tedious. The long and the short of it is that it is beyond the power of the Congress to, due to aliens, impose criminal sanctions or civil liability for things that they say that would be protected if a citizen said it. I'm going to read from the concurring opinion because concurring opinions are often used to warn the Congress to not in the future try to push the court, because it's not going to work out well for the Congress. The Congress will get slapped down, and this is one of those opinions. So, the record in this case will stand forever as a monument to man's intolerance of man. Hannibal, he's talking about people like you here, so listen up, sweet cheeks. And sweet cheeks, you have a lot of cheeks there, so I gotta really address them all. Seldom, if ever, in the history of this nation has there been such a concerted and relentless crusade to deport an individual because he dared to exercise the freedom that belongs to him as a human being and that is guaranteed to him by the Constitution. For more than a decade, powerful economic and social forces have combined with public and private agencies to seek deportation of Harry Bridges, who came to this country in 1920 from Australia. Emerging from the Pacific Coast Maritime Strike of 1934 as a recognized labor leader in that area, Bridges incurred the hatred and hostility of those whose interests coincided directly or indirectly with the vicious and inhumane practices towards longshoremen. Citation to some previous filing in the case, that Bridges was combating. His personal viewpoint on certain matters also antagonized many people of more conservative leanings. Agitation for his deportation arose. Industrial and farming organizations, veterans groups, city police departments, and private undercover agents all joined in an unremitting effort to deport him on the ground that he was connected with organizations dedicated to the overthrow of the government of the United States by force and violence. Wiretapping, searches and seizures without warrants, and other forms of invasion of the right to privacy have been widely employed in this deportation drive. This opposition to Bridges' presence in the United States has been as persistent as it has been undaunted by temporary setbacks to its aims, like petty inconveniences of the law getting in the way. The Immigration and Naturalization Service, after a thorough investigation of the original charges in 1934 and 1935, was unable to find even a, quote, shred of evidence, end quote, warranting his deportation, and the matter officially was dropped. But the campaign to banish him continued unabated. Eventually, a warrant was issued by the Immigration and Naturalization Service in 1938 seeking his deportation. A clean bill of health was given him, however, after a full hearing before a special examiner, Dean Landis of the Harvard Law School. This only led to demands that the deportation laws be changed to make sure that Bridges was exiled. Thereupon, a special bill was introduced and actually passed by the House of Representatives, directing the Attorney General, quote, notwithstanding any other provision of law, end quote, forthwith to take into custody and deport Harry Bridges, whose presence in this country the Congress deems hurtful. Fortunately, this bill died in a Senate committee after the Attorney General denounced it as inconsistent with the American practice and tradition of due process of law. Senate Report number 2031, 76 Congress, 3rd Session, page 9. As a substitute for this direct legislative assault upon Bridges, Congress amended the deportation law by enacting Section 23 of the Alien Registration Act of 1940, citation to the law. This amendment set aside this court's decision, this court being the Supreme Court, decision in Kessley v. Strecker, 307 U.S. 22, by making it clear that an alien could be deported if, at the time of entering the United States, or at any time thereafter, he was a member of or affiliated with an organization advocating the forceful overthrow of the government. It was thus no longer necessary that the alien be an affiliate or member at the time of the issuance of the warrant of arrest. In the words of the author of this amendment, quote, "It is my joy to announce that this bill will do, in a perfectly legal and constitutional manner, what the bill specifically aimed at the deportation of Harry Bridges seeks to accomplish." End quote. Wait, not end of quote, sorry. This bill changes the law so that the Department of Justice should now have little trouble in deporting Harry Bridges and others of similar ilk, end quote. 86 Congressional Record 9031. This prophecy was quickly realized to the satisfaction of the vast interests arrayed against Bridges. A warrant for his arrest and deportation under this new statutory provision was issued in 1941, followed by a hearing before another special examiner, Judge Sears. Evidence was presented by the government on practically the same matters as the first proceeding. This time, however, the examiner discovered sufficient grounds for recommending deportation. Although the Board of Immigration Appeals unanimously rejected this recommendation, the Attorney General, without holding a hearing or listening to argument, reversed the board and ordered the deportation of Bridges. By the way, for those of you who are wondering what this man's great crime was, he spoke in support of communism. That was his big crime. It is not surprising that the background and intensity of this effort to deport one individual should result in a singular lack of due process of law. Much of the evidence presented by the government has been described by the Attorney General as, quote, untrustworthy, contradictory, or unreliable, end quote. The remaining government evidence can scarcely be described in more generous terms, and the court's opinion, in which I join, demonstrates that the proceeding had its validity further undermined by a misconception of the statutory term, quote, affiliation, end quote, and by the improper use of hearsay statements. But the Constitution has been more than a silent, anemic witness to this proceeding. It has not stood idly by while one of its subjects is being excommunicated from this nation without the slightest proof that his presence constitutes a clear and present danger to the public welfare, nor has it remained aloof while this individual is being deported, resulting in the loss, quote, of all that makes life worth living, end quote. Citation to Wen Feng Ho against White, 259 U.S. 276, 284. On finding that, regardless of his personal beliefs, he was a member and an affiliate of an organization advocating the forceful overthrow of the government. When the immutable freedoms guaranteed by the Bill of Rights have been so openly and conceitedly ignored, the full wrath of constitutional condemnation descends upon the action taken by the government. And only by expressing that wrath can we give form and substance to, quote, the great, the indispensable democratic freedoms, end quote. Thomas V. Collins, 323 U.S. 516, 530, to which this nation is dedicated. The unconstitutionality of the statute in issue and the invalidity of the proceedings brought pursuant thereto are obvious, apparently not to people like Hannibal, the hater. As construed and applied in this case, the statute calls for the deportation of Harry Bridges after a fair hearing in which, quote, some, end quote, evidence is established that he was a member or affiliate of an organization advocating the forceful overthrow of the government. Such a provision rests its claim to legality upon one basic assumption, an assumption that is obnoxious and intolerable when viewed in light of the supernal heritage and ideals of this nation. This assumption underlying the statute is that the, quote, plenary, end quote, power of Congress to deport resident aliens is unaffected by the guarantee of substantive freedoms contained in the Bill of Rights. In other words, as the government has urged before us, the deportation power of Congress, quote, is unaffected by considerations which in other contexts might justify the striking down of legislation as an abridgment of constitutionally guaranteed rights of free speech and association, end quote. From this premise, it follows that Congress may constitutionally deport aliens for whatever reasons it may choose, limited only by the due process requirement of a fair hearing. The color of their skin, their racial background, or their religious faith may conceivably be used as basis for their banishment. An alien who merely writes or utters a statement critical of the government, or who subscribes to an unpopular political or social philosophy, or who affiliates with a labor union, or who distributes religious handbills on the street corner, may be subjected to the legislative whim of deportation. I am unable to believe that the Constitution sanctions that assumption, or the consequences that logically and inevitably flow from its application. The power to exclude and deport aliens is one springing out of the inherent sovereignty of the United States. The Chinese exclusion case, Che Chan-ping against the United States, 130 U.S. 581. Since an alien obviously brings with him no constitutional rights, Congress may exclude him, in the first instance, for whatever reason it sees fit. Turner against Williams, 194 U.S. 279. The Bill of Rights is a futile authority for the alien seeking admission for the first time to these shores. But once an alien lawfully enters and resides in this country, he becomes invested with the rights guaranteed by the Constitution to all people within our borders. Such rights include those protected by the First and Fifth Amendments and by the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment. None of these provisions acknowledges any distinction between citizens and aliens. They extend their inalienable privileges to, quote, all persons, end quote, and guard against any encroachment on those rights by federal or state authority. Indeed, this court has previously and expressly recognized that Harry Bridges, the alien, possesses the right to free speech and a free press, and the Constitution will defend him in the exercise of that right. Bridges against California, 314 U.S. 252. Since resident aliens have the constitutional rights, it follows that Congress may not ignore them in the exercise of its, quote, plenary, end quote, power of deportation. As this court said in a previous exclusion case, but this court has never held, nor must we now be understood as holding, that administrative officers, when executing the provisions of a statute invoking the liberty of persons, may disregard the fundamental principles that adhere in due process of law, as understood at the time of the adoption of the Constitution. The Japanese immigration case, which I can't pronounce, 189 U.S. 86, 100. No less may a statute on its face disregard the basic freedoms that the Constitution guarantees to aliens. The Chief Justice, in his dissenting opinion in Jones against Apelico, or Apelico, sorry, I can't pronounce that either, 316 U.S. 584, 609, has stated that, quote, the First Amendment prohibits all laws abridging freedom of press and religion, not merely some laws, or all except tax laws, end quote. By the same token, the First Amendment and other portions of the Bill of Rights make no exception in favor of deportation laws or laws enacted pursuant to a, quote, plenary, end quote, power of the government. Hence, the various provisions of the Constitution negative the proposition that Congress, in the exercise of a, quote, plenary, end quote, power, may override the rights of those who are numbered among the beneficiaries of the Bill of Rights. Any other conclusion would make our constitutional safeguards transitory and discriminatory in nature. Thus, the government would be precluded from enjoining or imprisoning an alien for exercising his freedom of speech. But the government at the same time would be free, from a constitutional standpoint, to deport him for exercising that very same freedom. The alien would be fully clothed with his constitutional rights when defending himself in a court of law, but he would be stripped of his rights when deportation officials encircle him. I cannot agree that the framers of the Constitution meant to make such an empty mockery of human freedom, since the basic assumption of the statute is false. The Bill of Rights must be brought to bear. And when that is done, several constitutional infirmities are apparent in this legislation. As shown by the record in this case, Harry Bridges has done no more than exercise his personal right to free speech and association. Yet, upon proof of that fact, he would be subject to the deportation under this statute. The invalidity of legislation of such nature is inescapable, but apparently, to retarded, dumb-fucked morons like Hannibal the moron, if you're not a citizen in these United States and you're visiting here, the Congress can pass a law that says, I'm sorry, you may not attend a Catholic Mass, you non-citizens. I'm sorry, you're not able to advocate any position or have any opinion without risking imprisonment or some kind of civil liability. You know, wars are fought over these types of principles, Hannibal, and it's specifically fought against motherfuckers like you.
The republic that gave us Kurt Waldheim as Secretary General of the United Nations, a man wanted in several countries for war crimes. You know, the country that has Jörg Haider, the leader of its own fascist party, in the cabinet that sent David Irving to jail. You know the two things that have made Austria famous, given it its reputation, by any chance? Just while I've got you. I hope there are some Austrians here to be upset by it. Well, a pity if not, but the two great achievements of Austria are to have convinced the world that Hitler was German and Beethoven was Viennese. Now to this proud record they can add, they have the courage finally to face their past and lock up a British historian who's committed no crime except that of thought and writing. And that's a scandal. And I can't find a seconder usually when I propose this, but I don't care. I don't need a seconder. My own opinion is enough for me, and I claim the right to have it defended against any consensus, any majority, anywhere, any place, any time. And anyone who disagrees with this can pick a number, get online, and kiss my ass. Now, I don't know how many of you don't feel you're grown up enough to decide this for yourselves and think you need to be protected from David Irving's edition of the Goebbels diaries, for example, out of which I learned more about the Third Reich than I had from studying Hugh Trevor Roper and A.J.B. Taylor combined when I was at Oxford. But for those of you who do, I'd recommend another short course of revision. Go again and see not just the film and the play, but read the text of Robert Bolt's wonderful play, Man for All Seasons. Some of you must have seen it, where Sir Thomas More decides that he would rather die than lie or betray his faith. And at one moment, More is arguing with a particularly vicious witch-hunting prosecutor, a servant of the king and a hungry and ambitious man. And More says to this man, you'd break the law to punish the devil, wouldn't you? And the prosecutor, the witch hunter, says, break it? He said, I'd cut down every law in England if I could do that, if I could capture him. And More says, yes, you would, wouldn't you? And then when you'd corner the devil and the devil turned round to meet you, where would you run for protection? All the laws of England having been cut down and flattened, who would protect you then? Bear in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that every time you violate or propose to violate the free speech of someone else, you, in potentia, you're making a rod for your own back, because the other question raised by Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes is simply this: who's going to decide? To whom do you award the right to decide which speech is harmful, or who is the harmful speaker, or to determine in advance what are the harmful consequences going to be that we know enough about in advance to prevent? To whom would you give this job? To whom are you going to award the task of being the censor? Isn't it a famous old story that the man who has to read all the pornography in order to decide what's fit to be passed and what is fit not to be is the man most likely to become debauched? Did you hear any speaker in the opposition to this motion, eloquent as one of them was, to whom you would delegate the task of deciding for you what you could read? To whom you would give the job of deciding for you, relieve you of the responsibility of hearing what you might have to hear? Do you know anyone? Hands up. Do you know anyone to whom you'd give this job? Does anyone have a nominee? You mean there's no one in Canada good enough to decide what I can read or hear? I had no idea. But there's a law that says there must be such a person, or there's a subsection of some piddling law that says it. Well, the hell with that law then. It's inviting you to be liars and hypocrites and to deny what you evidently know already.
Have a great day.